I have sat with this story for 14 months and I have not told it. Not to my editor, not to my photographer, not to the producer who commissioned the piece that took me inside that building in the first place. I filed the article. I turned in the photographs. I collected the check and I answered the follow-up emails, and I did every professional thing required of me with complete outward normalcy, while inside I was doing something that I can only describe as quietly, continuously coming apart at a seam that I am still not entirely sure has held. I tell it now because not telling it has its own weight. A specific, accumulating, 3 in the morning weight that has gotten heavier every month I've carried it alone. And because I think it needs to exist somewhere outside my own head. I think that's the only way the seam finishes healing. You put the thing into words. You send the words out. And you hope that the act of releasing it means it stops belonging only to you. My name is Jordan. I'm 31 years old. I'm a long-form journalist based out of Moundsville, West Virginia, which means I grew up in the shadow of the West Virginia State Penitentiary and have been aware of that building for as long as I've been aware of anything. If you don't know it, picture this. A Gothic stone fortress built in 1866, covering an entire city block, with a front facade of hand-cut sandstone and 2 towers flanking the main entrance that were designed to communicate a single message to everyone who passed them: that the people inside were not coming out, that the weight of the stone and the weight of the institution were one and the same, and both were permanent. The prison closed in 1995. It's a tourist destination now. Ghost tours, paranormal investigations, history buffs from all over the country paying for the experience of walking those cell blocks at night with flashlights and audio recorders. I'd done the public tour twice as a teenager, the way kids from Moundsville all do at some point, half thrill-seeking and half obligatory local knowledge. I knew the building. Or I thought I knew the building the way people think they know places they've walked through in groups with a guide and a rehearsed narrative. The assignment came from a regional history magazine that was running a series on decommissioned correctional facilities in Appalachia. Full access, overnight stay, in-depth written piece on the architecture, the history, the preservation effort. My photographer was a calm, technically brilliant woman named Reese, who had covered conflict zones and natural disasters, and who approached the overnight with the same flat professional energy she brought to everything. We were given a contact at the facility, a preservation coordinator named Phil, who had worked on the building's restoration for 9 years, and who gave us our orientation on a Thursday afternoon in October, with the easy, well-worn manner of someone who has delivered the same information many times to many people. He was thorough about most of it. The main cell blocks, the warden's quarters, the dining hall, the industrial spaces, the infirmary. He covered all of it with a detail and a care that reflected genuine love for the building's history. He had the dates and names and structural facts of a man who had made this place his life's work. I respected it. I took notes on all of it. But when he got to the North Annex, he changed. Not dramatically. Phil was not a dramatic person. It was a compression, more than anything. The same quality I'd noticed in Gerald at the Heritage Museum in Indianapolis, if you've heard that story. A slight acceleration of pace, an economy of language that wasn't present in the rest of the tour. He told us that the North Annex had been the facility's dedicated isolation unit from 1932 until the prison's closure, that it was a separate structure connected to the main building by an underground passage, that it had housed the facility's most severe disciplinary cases in individual cells with no natural light, no communal space, no human contact beyond the daily delivery of meals through a slot in the door. He told us the annex had not been included in the formal restoration effort. Structural reasons, primarily. The floor integrity on the lower level was uncertain and hadn't been fully assessed. He told us our access agreement covered the main building only. He told us the annex door in the underground passage was locked and that the key was not on the ring he was giving us. Then he looked at me for a moment with an expression that I have thought about many times since. Not a warning exactly, something more like an acknowledgement. Like a person who knows a thing and knows that telling it directly will only make it more compelling to the person who shouldn't hear it, and has made the calculated decision that not telling it is the lesser risk of the 2 available options. He handed me the key ring and said, "Enjoy the building. It's extraordinary. Just stay in the main structure." I told him we would, and I meant it when I said it. Reese and I spent the first several hours doing exactly what we were there to do. The main cell blocks were extraordinary. 5 tiers of cells, the original ironwork intact, the narrow walkways and the vast vaulted space of the central atrium filling with a particular kind of darkness as the October evening came down outside, and our work lights became the only illumination. I had brought a recorder and a notepad, and I moved through those galleries with a genuine, unhurried attentiveness that produced some of the best observational writing I've done. Reese shot 300 photographs before 11 p.m. The building deserved every second of it. We ate in the old warden's office at midnight. Reese went to sleep around 1 in one of the cots we'd set up in the guard station on the 2nd tier, and I went back to writing up notes at the long table by the main entrance. I found the passage at 1:45. I wasn't looking for it. I want to be absolutely clear about that because I know how it sounds. I was following the west corridor toward the industrial wing to check a measurement I needed for a description of the laundry facility, and the passage entrance was recessed into the wall behind a section of original cabinetry that had been pulled away from the wall as part of an ongoing inventory project. A low arched opening, not hidden, not sealed, simply set back and unlit and easily missed if you weren't moving slowly in that direction with a work light. And the door at the end of it was not locked. The padlock was on the hasp, but the hasp was not secured to the bracket. Someone at some recent point had failed to engage the mounting, and the whole mechanism was simply resting in place, held by nothing, swinging open when I put the lightest pressure on the door. I stood in that passage for a full 2 minutes making the argument with myself that I have thought about extensively since. The argument that I lost. The north annex was a separate structure, lower ceilinged than the main building, the stone different, a darker and coarser material that absorbed my work light rather than reflecting it, making every 10 feet of corridor feel like entering a new and smaller room. The air was different too. Not cold exactly, pressurized, dense in a way that resisted your movement through it, as though the space had been sealed long enough to develop its own atmosphere and was not entirely willing to share it. The isolation cells ran along both sides, 8 on each side, 16 total, each door solid steel rather than the barred ironwork of the main blocks. No visibility into the cells from the corridor, no windows. The meal slots in the lower section of each door sealed with interior bolts from the inside, which told you something about the level of control required in this specific space. The doors were all closed, all of them, every single one. I walked to the end of the corridor slowly, making notes. Reese would come in the morning and photograph this with proper equipment and proper authorization, and I was simply noting the dimensions, the construction, the atmosphere of the space, doing my job. At the end of the corridor there was a single cell that was different from the others, wider, the door not steel but wood, original timber, swollen with decades of moisture and sealed into its frame with the specific permanence of something that hasn't moved in a very long time. A small placard beside it, handwritten on a piece of card that had been laminated at some point and tacked to the wall. I brought my light close to read it. It said, "Long term, 1941, 1994, 53 years, one occupant or a succession of them I didn't know. 53 years of a room being used for its most extreme intended purpose." I stood in front of that door for a moment, and then, because I am a journalist, and because the detail mattered to the piece, I tried the handle. The door opened. Not easily. It ground against the frame with the resistance of long disuse, and the sound of it moving was enormous in the silence of that corridor, a low, grinding protest that seemed to travel the full length of the building and back. But it opened. The room beyond was small, smaller than I expected, 8 feet by 10 approximately. Stone walls. A concrete sleeping platform raised from the floor. A single drain in the center of the floor. No window. No opening of any kind except the door. The ceiling was lower than the corridor, maybe 7 feet, and the work light I carried barely covered the far wall. And the walls. The walls were covered in marks, every inch of them, from the floor to as high as a person standing could reach. Marks made with something hard against the stone. scratched in with patience and with time, and with the slow accumulation of days that had nowhere else to go. Most of them were count marks, the classic groupings of 4 vertical lines crossed by a diagonal fifth, thousands of them, covering every available surface in dense, careful rows that had been organized with a precision that spoke of someone with nothing but time and the need to confirm that time was still passing. But between the count marks, filling the spaces where the groupings didn't reach, other things, shapes, not symbols I recognized, not letters or numbers or any notation system I could identify, forms that repeated, the same 4 or 5 shapes cycling through the spaces between the counts with a consistency that suggested meaning, that insisted on meaning. A language developed in isolation with no one to receive it. A communication addressed to no one, to the walls themselves, to whoever came after. I stood in the center of that room with my work light, and I turned slowly and looked at every wall, and I felt something happen in my chest that I can only describe as the recognition of an enormity. Not fear exactly. Not yet. Something larger than fear. The weight of what that room had contained. The specific gravity of 53 years of human consciousness pressed into 8 by 10 feet of stone. And then the door swung closed behind me. Not slammed, not violently. The slow, gravity-assisted swing of a heavy door on old hinges. The same inevitability as a tree falling. And it closed with a sound that was more felt than heard. A deep concussive thud that I registered in my sternum. And the light from the corridor disappeared completely. Total darkness. The specific total darkness of a room with no windows and a closed door, and no external light source of any kind. The work light I was carrying was still on. I could see my own hands. I could see the walls closest to me. But the corners were gone. The spaces where the walls met the floor and the ceiling on the far side of the room were absolutely consumed, not dimmed but absent. And in that absence, my brain began the thing that human brains do in total darkness, when the rational system starts losing its grip on the available information. It began filling in the corners, not with images, with presence, with the specific, unverifiable, absolutely convincing sense that the darkness in the corner directly behind me was occupied, that something had been in this room for so long, in darkness precisely like this, that the darkness had become its medium, its natural state, and that my light, my small inadequate circle of work light, was not illuminating the room so much as defining the precise boundary of where it was not. I turned around. The corner was empty. Stone and count marks and the shapes I couldn't read, scratched deep into the surface with whatever instrument had been available, patient and repetitive, and reaching from the floor upward as high as hands could reach. But the cold arrived then. Not a draft. Not a mechanical temperature change. A cold that had direction. That came from the corner directly and moved toward me with the slow deliberateness of something that had identified me and was closing the distance between us at a pace calibrated to something other than urgency. Unhurried. Thorough. The cold of a patience so long and so complete that it had become its own entity. I got the door open. It took both hands and a specific lifting pressure on the handle that I found through pure panic trial, and I do not know how many seconds that took because time in that room was not functioning with any reliability. I got the door open and I got into the corridor, and I did not stop moving until I was back through the passage entrance and into the main building with the cabinetry between me and the arched opening and my back against the opposite wall. I sat on the floor of that corridor for a long time, with the lights of the main building around me and the sound of the old structure settling in the October cold and the distant, reassuring evidence of the inhabited world outside those sandstone walls. In the morning, I told Reese the annex door had been open, but that I hadn't gone in. I told Phil the same thing when I returned the key ring. He looked at me for a moment in exactly the same way he'd looked at me during the orientation. That same careful, calculated assessment, and nodded once and said nothing. I filed the article 3 weeks later. It was well received. The magazine ran it as the lead piece in the series. My editor called it immersive. I have thought about that word since. Immersive. About the particular accuracy of it. About standing in 8 by 10 feet of stone and feeling the darkness move toward you with the patience of something that has been waiting in that room since 1941. About the marks on the walls. About the shapes between the count marks that repeated and repeated like something desperately trying to be understood. About what gets left behind in a space where a human mind has been pressed against the absolute limits of isolation for longer than most people are alive. About whether the thing I felt moving toward me in that corner was the residue of what had suffered there, or whether it was what the suffering had eventually become. I moved apartments 4 months ago. I had a ground floor place with a storage room at the back that had no window and a door that sometimes swung closed on its own in drafts, and I moved out of it without fully explaining to myself or anyone else exactly why. I have a 3rd floor unit now, windows on 3 sides, every room lit. Bailey would have approved of the corner situation, if you've heard that story. Every light source has a backup in this apartment. Every single one. Because I know now, in a way I cannot unknow, what a room looks like when the light runs out. What waits in corners that have held darkness long enough to claim it. What patience looks like when it has been given 53 years and stone walls and absolute silence to develop itself in. And I know that the marks on those walls were not addressed to no one. They were addressed to whoever eventually opened that door. They were addressed to me. If you've ever been inside a space that held the compressed weight of years of isolation, and felt something in that compression that was not simply history, but something still present, still aware, still oriented toward you, I need you to describe it in the comments. What it felt like the moment you knew the room was not empty. What made you leave and how long it took you to feel the temperature return to normal afterward. And if you want more stories from people who opened doors they were told to leave closed and brought something back with them in the lining of every quiet moment since, subscribe to Campfire Nightmares, because some rooms don't stop being occupied just because the institution that built them has been closed for 30 years. Some rooms just keep waiting, patient and dark and absolutely certain that eventually someone will turn the handle. Someone always turns the handle.